Hello, and we are continuing our series on authentic assessment, and from this video on we will be introducing some tools for assessment for all our viewers. This video is timestamped so that you can easily navigate to that which is of your interest. So some tools of authentic assessment, we'll speak about the rubrics today, but in subsequent episodes we are also going to be talking about checklists and rating scales. We are familiar with all these and we use them all the time because they help us to collect data about specific content knowledge, specific skills and specific attitudes as well. We'll also be dealing with observation and anecdotal records a little bit later because this is something that we need to know because it's continuous, comprehensive assessment that we do, and it's a part of our pedagogy to also make sure that we are noting down what we are observing. Portfolios is a beautiful idea again, and we will be taking you through that as well in another episode. If there is a reference to some previous episode or previous series that we have done, I will be pointing that to you, and you will probably like to go back there and check out something else that we might have done. Do look at this video till its very end, because towards the end we are going to be actually taking the viewer through how do you actually craft a rubric for your students. Let's begin. Once again, we are talking about formative assessment, and if you might have seen in the previous episode, the first one, where we talked about what is formative and what is summative assessment and differentiated between the two. Assessment for learning, assessment of learning. Today we're dealing with assessment as learning, and that is why we are also going to be talking about the rubrics. So what is there to be taught? That those are the learning outcomes. How should I teach? That's the pedagogy. How do I know whether my students are getting it? That's the formative assessment, and it is in a cycle. Now when we say rubrics, we are also pointing to self-regulated learning, and which is why the arrow is going back to myself, to the assessment, because it is allowing me to regulate my own learning. Once more, it's like a revision, and you must have seen in a couple of earlier episodes that when we say what is worth teaching, we actually think about what are the learning outcomes that I need to craft in how many dimensions. And that is the what in the teaching learning cycle. So there are concepts, skills, facts, values and vocabulary. We also mention the misconceptions. We also talk about both academic and incidental vocabulary while crafting objectives. In some other episode, which we might bring you a couple of weeks later, we will also mention the Bloom's taxonomy for crafting objectives. Today, however, we are focusing on the rubrics. And once we are clear about the learning objectives, we then go to the pedagogy and we use teaching strategies. If some students are not getting it because it's formative, remember, we do diagnosis, we also remediate, we also engage in differentiated instruction as well as accelerated teaching. All of these are separate modules that Shikshangan does, and you will find them in various playlists on our YouTube channel. We then do the assessment, which is formative in nature. How do I know whether my students are learning? These assessments need to be continuous and comprehensive, and we are introducing the tool Rubric today. And over subsequent episodes, we will be bringing you a couple of other tools as well. Now there is a difference here, because the student is actually taking charge of her own learning through the rubric, through self-regulation. And I might as well call out once more that the National Education Policy calls out self-regulated learning as an important dimension in the coming years. So what they're saying is allow the students to take charge of the journey of their own learning, and the rubric is a very, very good tool to allow them to do that. So what is the rubric? It is a metacognitive tool. Metacognitive, it allows you to think about your own thinking and your own learning because it's self-assessment. So you hand out the rubrics to the students even before the assessment is to be done. So they begin to look at what are the criteria, what are the various descriptors, and where do I need to really go? Where am I in my learning journey? Where am I supposed to go? We will talk about the rubrics soon. Let us begin by talking about what has been the journey, what has been the history of assessment everywhere, all over the world, and it's continuing to be in a very, very backward state in many parts of our country, and we are trying to bring it all up to speed with the rest of the world, and that's what the NEP 2020 is, and that's why it's such a beautiful document. So from simple marking that we have experienced as children to rubrics, what does that mean? Here is a little bit of a history of assessment. Here's a case study. There is a child, Aman, who has just appeared for a letter writing test. We all did, regardless of the language or the medium we studied in. He just got his paper back with 8 upon 15 as the score. Many of us got such scores with nothing further except can do better. And you do not know can do better in what? Satisfactory. In what way? Okay. Now, what do these marks not tell Aman about his performance? Very clearly, they don't tell him where has he lost the marks, why has he lost the marks, what is he supposed to do if he needs to improve, what is the final target that the teacher has in mind. Now, there was an improvement on this, okay? And I put this in because there's a lot of confusion and a lot of my friends think that a rubric is the same as marking the scheme, but it is not, which is why I have put this. So Aman now knows the marking scheme of his paper and what he scored on each criteria, and it looks something like this. The teacher had planned 5 marks for format, Aman got 3. The teacher had planned 5 marks for content, Aman scored 3. And there were 5 marks for grammar, Aman has scored 2, and therefore his score was 8 upon 15. This is an improvement. Yet, Aman still does not know how he can get 5 in format, 5 in content, and 5 in grammar. That is still a mystery. It is still can do better that many of us grew up with in India. And that's why a rubric is the only tool, an authentic tool, which will have an answer to this question. So what does it look like? It looks like this. So there is criteria, format, content, and grammar. Okay, that's criteria mentioned even in the marking scheme, mind you, but that's not a rubric. Then there are descriptors, and currently there are dashes on this slide, but the next slide will elaborate on this. And Aman scored 3, 3, and 2. He got 8 upon 15. We need to look at what is required for Aman to score better than what he did. How does this look? It looks like this. So criteria again, format, content, and grammar, but notice the difference. Okay? So now we've given it certain levels. I'm calling it beginning, developing, achieved. You can say anything else, any other verbs that you might want to use here. Okay? A rubric should have 3 to 4 to maximum 5 levels of performance. So beginning, developing, and achieved are levels of performance. Aman has got 8, as we know. His score is 3, 3, and 2. But what was the teacher expecting for him to have got 5? So look at the level achieved. In format, work shows 5 steps of the format are complete, all the placing is correct. But Aman got 3, which means his work showed only 3 steps of the format, if you read the descriptor there. Similarly, in grammar, for getting 5, punctuation, spelling, and everything else that the teacher might have as the final learning outcome is in place. But he got 2, which means if you read under 2, beginning, Aman actually had both punctuation and spelling with a lot of errors. So a rubric, therefore, is a marked improvement on a marking scheme, and that's the difference here. So what are the components of a rubric? It has a scale of points, that means marks. You need not have marks, you can say ABC grades, but it has some scale of points. It has performance levels, like I have said, beginning, developing, achieved. You could have proficient, mastery. You can take it up to 5 levels. So it has performance levels. It has criteria on the left-hand column. And you can call it criteria, you can call it parameters. As we can see, this is clearly linked to the learning outcomes. You want them to do well on the format, the content, the grammar, so that becomes your criteria, all right? But the change here, or the improvement here, which makes it really authentic and which cannot be actually challenged or questioned, is that there are descriptors for every performance level. The descriptors are what is written here. So you might wonder, where is this coming from? It's coming from the children's work. So one of the ways, so when I do workshops of how do you develop a rubric, one of the ways which we do is take children's work and look at the various levels of their work and write down your descriptors. Easy to write that which is the final outcome you expect, and then go down and write the other levels. So this is really a format of a rubric. Let's take it a little bit further and see whether we can develop a rubric. So there is criteria. I'm trying to do it for writing. So the other good thing is try to do rubrics in the beginning for skills which take a long time to develop. Now my criteria are opening up. I'm saying that any piece of good writing, not necessarily letter writing, should have ideas. The ideas should be organized. There should be an expression, language and so on for the ideas, how they have been expressed. Conventions over here means grammar. Convention is a better word. Okay? And legibility, because we also want them to write well in the handwriting. First, lay down the criteria. Okay? The next thing we do is for each of the criteria, we select attributes, that means features of that criteria, which we want to see in the rubric developed later. Okay? This is an important part of this presentation. And how do you really start developing a rubric? I'll be very happy to answer many questions, and you can ask them in the comment section of this video. Now you start describing the attributes. So for example, for ideas, I'm saying I really want to focus on the topic. I want a variety of ideas. I'd like to see a beginning, a middle, and an introduction, a middle and an end, maybe, that might come in organization. So introduction, middle and end sequence is what I want to see in organization. In expression, I'm going to be focusing on the language, the sentence structure, vocabulary, is it idiomatic, other phrases in place and so on. That's I look at expression. In conventions, which is grammar, I would look at spelling, punctuation, capitalization and so on, and lots else. This is a demo slide, but we can put in as many things as appear in our final learning outcome for that particular goal that we have in mind, which in this case is good writing. Legibility, readability, spacing, letter formation and so on. So we first of all think about the criteria, which are always linked to our learning goals, learning outcomes. We then describe attributes for each criteria at every level. And then, of course, we start writing all the descriptors, which we will see on the next slide. We suggest from Shikshangan that first start developing rubrics for skills which take a long time to develop, because a rubric is a hard task to make. There's a lot of help available on the internet. You can take that, but you also need to craft your own. So when you do it for skills, writing is built and developed over a long period of time, from kindergarten to even now. I think we're constantly improving on our writing, and any of the skill which takes a longer time. Let us see how all of this actually fits finally into a rubric. Okay? I've deliberately color coded it here because you will see that on the next slide. How does this look in a rubric? Because the next rubric is going to also have the descriptors. So here we go. The same rubric. So I said ideas, organization of ideas, expression of ideas, conventions and legibility. Here I'm taking 3 levels of performance, right? Emerging, which is the beginning, then the developing, and then the strong. Like you can see, you can use any adjective to describe your level of performance. For my rubric, I have not given any marks or grades because it is formative assessment. I am going to be sharing this rubric with the parents, with the students, so they too can see where are they in their journey of learning, formative, what do they need to do to go to the next level. So rubric is a self-regulation tool. It's allowing your student to be on the journey, to track the journey, to go to the next goal post. Now you'll see here in the color, all the levels, whether it's emerging or developing or strong, has got those attributes of ideas. Focused, language, information, communication and so on. Similarly, the organizational band, it has the beginning, middle and end at every level. Similarly, grammar, convention, expression and so on. This is the way we craft a rubric, right? So what have we learned? For a rubric, for me as a teacher, when I was a young teacher and I was teaching in schools, I wish there was a rubric idea then, because parents would keep coming to you and saying, where did I lose? Where did my child lose? Half a mark, quarter mark? I don't know. And it was hard to explain because your comments are can do better or satisfactory. But a rubric is so authentic. Just show it to the parent and say, here, see, this is where your student is and this is where I want them to go. So it actually links up the learning objectives and the formative assessment, because the learning objectives are there in your criteria. So they should be designed as soon as you have laid down your learning outcomes or objectives. For the teacher, the rubric helps to bring the focus on the learning outcomes. She doesn't go here and there. All the teaching is related, linked to the learning outcomes. Assessment also is linked to the learning outcomes, and that is the way it should be. For the students, though, what happens? It becomes a guiding compass because the rubrics must be shared with the students and with the parents. Transparency in whatever we do. We don't want to say, I cut you. Transparency in what we do, so it becomes a guiding compass because they look at it, they know what path they have to take, which will take them to the ultimate goal of whatever is the maximum level of achievement. Okay? So therefore, they are tracking their own performance, and this is what is called out in the National Education Policy as self-regulated learning. So that's what I had to say about rubric. The following episodes will actually be tracking many other good tools for formative and authentic assessment. So stay with us. I hope you like what we present from Shikshangan. If you do subscribe. Not just watch, but do subscribe. That will help our channel and it will help us do better work for you. Thank you for watching.